let's get started. I'm Sean, and welcome back to another AMA. And I'm delighted to welcome Jake Watson here today. Jake, thank you very much for joining us.
No, an absolute pleasure. Thanks for asking.
Thank you. And so first of all, if you'd just like to tell everyone a bit about what it is you're doing at the moment and what sort of stuff you're working on.
Yeah, lots of things. So in a nutshell, I work in sports media. The bulk of my life and time is spent at talkSPORT, which is branded as the world's biggest sports radio station. I'm not sure if it is officially, but anyway, that's what we call ourselves. I'm sure we must be, otherwise they can't go around saying that, right? But yeah, I've been working at talkSPORT for about 5 years now. I am the on-air producer for the Early Sports Breakfast, so basically the warm-up act for Laura Woods and Alan Brazil, and then I do my own show on talkSPORT 2 Monday to Fridays, 8 till 9. So yeah, that's the bulk of my life spent at talkSPORT, but I also work at other places like ITV, IMG, BT Sport. I also run the media department for the rugby league side here in London, the London Broncos. I'm off to training actually there in about an hour or so ahead of a big game this weekend. And in between all of that as well, I do a little bit of modelling, as you know, Sean. So fingers in many pies and a busy man, but loving it all.
Yeah, I think that when they came up with the phrase "face for radio," it was absolutely not applied to you, Jake. Because,
Thank you.
I don't want to pour it on too thick here, but my God, Jake is a beautiful man, and if you can find on Instagram, then please do. But that I'll come to that in a minute because it is very interesting, and we should talk about it. But the first thing I just want to pick up on is, like you said, you mentioned there, talkSPORT. It's a massive thing. It's everywhere on my Twitter feed. There's always people talking about it, and I just want to, if it's okay with you, go back to the first time you were ever on air. How did that feel? What was that like as an experience?
What, first time on air at talkSPORT or on radio as such?
Oh, well, if you want to maybe go for, you're better at this interview stuff than I am. Maybe, if you want to tell us a bit about your first time ever, and then also your first time on talkSPORT.
Yeah, well, obviously it was a little bit different by the time I got to talkSPORT because I did have quite a lot of experience by that point. So obviously I did sports journalism and specialised in broadcast. So radio and television was what I always wanted to go into. And my first ever job, which is, again, we're trying to work out, probably about 12 years ago now, was in local radio, and I was a broadcast journalist, so effectively what you'd know as a newsreader. And that was a very serious job, which, in all seriousness, wasn't really suited to me. But it was a great entry level position for me, and a great opportunity, and one that I loved. And I was there doing various positions for a few years. But yeah, the first time I ever did that, kind of radio secrets. I wasn't actually live. I was pre-recorded when I did my news bulletins, which is obviously a lot less daunting, isn't it? Because you get the chance to edit it and have a number of goes at it until you're happy with what you sound like. So I pre-recorded myself for quite a while. And then eventually I remember the first time I did do a live bulletin, and that was incredibly nerve-wracking. But what I would say is that you tend not to make as many mistakes when you're live, and I know that's a strange thing to say, but your brain kicks into gear because you know you're live. It's like I don't know. I'm trying to think of what you can compare it to. But when it's real life, you kick into gear, and once you get over that first hurdle of going through a bulletin and not making a mistake, you realise that you can do it. And then I remember the first time I actually presented a show as opposed to not doing the news, and that was also incredibly daunting. And I remember at that point, I used to write my links in terms of what I was going to be saying and what my songs were coming up and what I was going to be talking about, just to make sure that it sounded good. Once you get over that, you'll do that for a couple of weeks and then realise that you don't really need to do that. I know some presenters still do script lots of their links in between songs if they do that style of radio. But the beauty of talkSPORT is that because it's not music radio, you've got a huge kind of opportunity and platform and time space usually to kind of just talk about football. Or sport, which is great. You don't really need to script that as long as you know what you're talking about. And do you know what? If I'm honest, Sean, I can't remember the first time I ever went on air on talkSPORT.
It probably was that
bad. Yeah, I mean, I probably erased it from my memory. But if I'm completely honest, I cannot remember. It would have been on the sister station or the smaller station of talkSPORT 2. We used to do a show called the Premier League Today, which is obviously talking about stuff from the Premier League that day. Exactly what it says on the tin. And there was a number of kind of on-air presenters and producers who would do that kind of role. And I'd imagine that I did that first and foremost when I first moved to talkSPORT. But I remember I did the overnight show, talkSPORT Extra Time. I remember going on air for the first time on that one because you go into the big studio where you know that all the other ones have been in, and you've spent your life in your car listening to Adrian Durham or Alan Brazil, and then suddenly you're in that same studio. And I remember that being kind of really kind of exciting. And I remember I listened back the next day on the app to the show to hear what I sounded like, and I think I just about sounded like I knew what I was talking about. So that was exciting. I won't lie.
No, that sounds brilliant. You mentioned some names there, Adrian Durham and Alan Brazil. One of the questions I was going to come to is, when you've been around like sort of these big names and guests and other things like that, has there ever been a moment in your career, I guess it'd be more in the earlier days, where you've been starstruck or awestruck at what you're working with or what you're doing?
I suppose a little bit. It is quite bizarre that when I'm at talkSPORT, in terms of it's quite funny, Sean, that when I first started at talkSPORT and you told somebody you worked at talkSPORT, the first question they'd always ask is, "What's Adrian Durham like?" Because he's just this figure, isn't he, where he'd like to rile up fans, and every football fan in the world is absolutely convinced that Adrian Durham had an agenda against their football club. So that was always the first question I ever got. Now, I've spoken to Adrian, hundreds of times, but with him being now live sport and drive, and me being in the early mornings, I've never actually met him in person, and that's often the case with lots of these people. I'm in the office at 4 a.m. in the morning, and I'm out the door by about 9:30. So I'm kind of leaving as everybody else is coming in. But now the first question that anybody asks me when I tell them I work at talkSPORT is, "Oh, what? So Laura Woods?" And that's what I get now.
Moved on.
So it's quite bizarre that obviously everyone sees Laura Woods as this absolute superstar, and she is. She's amazing and she's lovely. But she's the girl I see before she comes on air every morning. So it's kind of just normal. I think the only two times I've genuinely felt a little bit starstruck and a little bit kind of aware of the magnitude of what I do wasn't anyone that I kind of worked with, but people I've spoken to whilst at work, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
The first time was a couple of years ago where we had the England against India cricket series. And Kevin Peterson came in. He was part of our commentary team, and it was weird, Sean, because I like my cricket, but I wouldn't call myself an avid. There's certainly bigger cricket fans. Let's put it this way. But there was just something about Kevin Peterson. He just had this aura, and he's so much. I mean, I'm 6'4", and Kevin Peterson was taller than me, and he just had this thing about him, and I did feel a little bit like I was in greatness. And the only other time as well is, as a producer, I have to call up people all the time and send text messages. Again, if you were to go through my phone book, it's just filled with footballers and former footballers, and people love going through my phone book. But I'm a supporter of Leicester, as you'll know.
Indeed.
And I called up Sven-Göran Eriksson. Again, this was a good few years ago, and I've actually spoken to Sven a number of times now, but he struck me as the kind of guy that wouldn't reply to a message, so I thought I'll just call him. Yeah. And then it was just the most surreal thing in the world when Sven answered and just goes, "Hello," in just this exactly how you'd expect Sven to speak, and it was just like, wow, I'm speaking to Sven-Göran Eriksson. So they're the two moments that kind of jump out as like, wow, that was quite cool.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. When you were saying then about speaking to Sven-Göran Eriksson on the phone, I remember once I had to ring up Stuart Downing, who was playing in like a charity match.
Yeah.
But probably about 30 seconds into the call, his doorbell rang. He said, "Oh, can I just go and get that? I'll leave you one." But for a while, I was probably there for like another minute, just in silence. Just, I hope he hasn't forgotten about me.
Yeah,
he's coming back here.
Just that awkward of just waiting.
I know. But I just thought, well, he's the superstar, and you're just the interviewer, so just be quiet and be grateful. So you mentioned there about being a Leicester City fan. when you're speaking on talkSPORT, I was just thinking, because you sort of say like I think there's a sort of a desire and a sort of enthusiasm at talkSPORT to kind of create, like debate and trying to get people talking and that kind of thing. Are you encouraged to sort of bring your personality through as a Leicester City fan, or are they, do you need to try and stay neutral?
No, I think the good thing about sport, and particularly in football, is it is so tribal, Sean, that even if you try to, keep some kind of anonymity in terms of the football team you supported, you're not going to do it. If you're Laura Kunsberg and you're working for the BBC as a politics, you've got to try remain impartial and not let people know which political leanings you have. But in football, it's just not possible. Yeah. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's encouraged, but it's just completely accepted that we are naturally going to talk more about the football clubs that we support. And obviously we're able to talk about it with kind of better insight. I mean, particularly with Leicester, because it's a non-Big Six club, there's lots that people don't necessarily know because it's not as readily available and easy to obtain that information as the Big Six. It's not spoken about as much. So everyone knows who everyone supports. I say it's not encouraged, but it's certainly not discouraged.
Yeah. Okay. I've got two. I will come back on to more Leicester in a second, but I've got two other questions I just wanted to ask you quickly. I think you mentioned about like listening back to yourself at one point. Do you find that weird? Do you find that weird hearing yourself on the radio, or are you used to it now and it's just like second nature?
Yeah, I'm used to it now. But it's definitely something everyone should do when they first start. And the same with television as well. Now, before I worked at talkSPORT, when I was living back in Norwich, I did local television for about 3 years. And, when you listen back to yourself, Sean, and when you watch yourself back, you'd be amazed at the amount of things you say and do which you never realised you did. And then it's a really good learning tool. And I realised there's been certain points when I'd interview somebody, I'd always start with the same sort of words. I think my kind of crutch as such was now obviously. That's how I'd always start a question. I never realised I did that until I listened to myself back all the time. And there'd be certain things maybe you do with your hands when you're presenting that you don't realise that you do until you watch yourself back. So it's absolutely something I'd encourage people to do when they're first starting. But it does get to the point now that I would only listen back to a show now if I think I've done something particularly funny or bad, just to make sure it was either funny or it wasn't as bad as I thought it was at the time. So I don't really listen back all that much now, but it is something in terms of a learning tool people should absolutely do.
No, that's a really interesting. I never actually thought of listening back as a sort of a way to improve your technique. I was sort of thought of maybe it just as like, the novelty factor.
Yeah. Like there's that as well. Send it to your mum and say, look, Mum, I'm on the radio. But she gets bored eventually as well.
I thought she'd be ringing in and saying, you don't know what you're talking about, Jake.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, so are you involved in sort of like phone-ins and this kind of thing? Like, do you have a regular kind of involvement with that?
No, not really, because of the time that I'm on talkSPORT is 5 till 6 a.m. We do have callers in, and we play a little feature at the end of each game, the birthday game, which obviously we encourage callers to come on and they play against me. And usually someone else from the talkSPORT office who we just drag in. So that's kind of all the callers that we really have. And because it is just an hour between 5 and 6, it's not really time for callers to do all that. So, I mean, yes, I have done it in terms of producing and working on the phones and deciding who doesn't sound too mental to stick on air. But I don't have to do it too much, thankfully, because I think it's quite a difficult one, to be honest.
Yeah, no, that sounds fair enough. This has worked out very neatly because one of our new listeners in the group is the Big Strong Leicester Boys podcast.
I've just seen.
Which is another of your ventures. Firstly, I have an inkling as to why it is named that, but could you please just explain to everyone where the name Big Strong Leicester Boys comes from?
No, I'd like to hear your inkling first.
Well, it just sounds like something Brendan Rodgers would say. I
suppose it does, actually. I mean, I've not heard that one before.
I've just got his voice in my head.
Yeah.
Your podcast.
No, I have to say, now you say it does sound like something Brendan would say, wouldn't it? And I'm now doing that in Brendan's voice. But no, it's a little bit of a bizarre one. It's a bit of an in-joke with Leicester fans. and it kind of became synonymous with them. But also I thought it was just a funny name in the fact that if you're not a Leicester fan, you're going to remember what the name of the podcast is. And it's quite funny, actually, the fact we're on Twitter Spaces right now is because that's where it came from. So there was a Leicester fan, Sean, who, if you remember during COVID, there was this period, wasn't there, where people were doing these spaces and taking it in turns to do karaoke, weren't they?
I remember Declan Rice.
Exactly.
Rice, baby.
Yeah, and there was a Leicester fan called Dan Sharp, who also has another name, which isn't really suitable for me to say here. And he did a rap, and the rap was the Big Strong Leicester Boys. So it just became this point there, wherever and whenever there was kind of a group of Leicester fans and lads together, you kind of joke saying, "Oh, the Big Strong Leicester Boys," and it just became this thing. So I thought that, we're a group of lads. It's a funny name for a podcast. The Leicester fans will know the meaning of it, and then everybody else would remember the name. So it's kind of just stuck. I know a few people aren't particularly keen on it, but I like it.
There you go. Some positives did come out of lockdown, and that's one of them. So how did that all start then? How did you get involved with that and creating that with the other people that you host that with?
Yeah, so I mean, it's an interesting one because I won't lie, I was a little bit reluctant at first, just because I am so busy with my other projects. And the two lads, there's now three of us, but there was a couple of lads who initially started with it. They'd been speaking for a while about wanting to do a podcast. And, I said it was, okay, fine. And then eventually we thought, come on, right, let's do it. Let's go for it. We had a name and we just went for it. But I don't think any of them kind of really quite realised the time that it actually takes. It's not just as simple as just talking for an hour and sticking it on social media. The effort it goes to in terms of booking guests and then editing it and running the social media accounts. It is a bit of a labour of love, but I have to say I do really enjoy it because, working at talkSPORT, you don't actually get too much opportunity to talk all that much about Leicester. I'll spend an hour talking about Spurs this morning. And I suspect that come Monday, it's going to be a similar topic. It's always kind of really dominated by the big six. So it's quite cathartic as well, in a sense. When Leicester aren't playing well, which happens quite a lot these days, it's nice to kind of rant and rave for about an hour and get it off your chest.
Yeah, I was going to say that because what's the sort of the response been like? Because it must, like you say, it must be a very good. I think when you can speak. For me, one of the sort of most off-putting things when you're listening to someone being interviewed about a club they support is when you can tell that they're sort of having to filter out what they're saying. Whereas if you have a platform like that where you say you can say, what you want. Yeah. How's that been received by your audience?
Yeah, no, I think well. I mean, the numbers are good and they're going up week on week. It is quite nice. I mean, we don't do it too much, but if you really do feel that urge to swear, that we can do that, which of course ordinarily is not something I'm allowed to do. But yeah, no, I mean, you still do have to remember that you can't just say whatever you want because podcasts these days are so popular and they're so listened to that if you do say something which is either kind of grossly over the top or potentially libelous, you are still you need to be aware that this is going and it is available for people to listen to. And I do know for a fact that football clubs do listen to these podcasts. The amount of times that we've had interviews, we've had the likes of Gary Lineker, Danny Simpson, the club's former chairman on the podcast. When these people say stuff, the quotes get picked up and they're like in the local papers and stuff. So you can't just say whatever you want, but it is nice to be able to kind of go more in depth with a topic which, say, usually you wouldn't be able to. Just be a quick word on the game. You only really talk about Leicester if they lose to one of the big six or win against one of the big six, and it's then even then at that point it's kind of more about them than it is Leicester.
Yeah, without wanting to get too starry-eyed about it, what was it like as a fellow broadcaster having Gary Lineker there? I'm guessing like one of your heroes as well, I'm assuming.
Yeah, no, and when I spoke about, when I was being in awe of Kevin Peterson and Sven, I did miss Gary off that list. And I was a little bit, well, I say a little bit, I was very excited when I found out he was on the podcast. I think the best thing about that was when we found out he'd agreed to do it, we literally had about an hour between when he said yes to when we did it. So I didn't have time to really get nervous. No, but that's the best way to do things, Sean. Because look, at the end of the day, you're just speaking to another man. That's all it is. And you can overcomplicate and, overthink things. And the reality is he knows about Leicester and he likes Leicester, and so do I. And that's what we're going to be talking about. So I remember when he was in the waiting area before I put him live on the podcast. I did have a little girly squeak and squeal. I was thinking, wow, this is pretty cool, But yeah, no, that was pretty great. And Gary was really good as well, because you never really know what these people are going to be like when you speak to them.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, he was very open, very honest, and good fun. I enjoyed speaking to Gary a lot.
Remembering your rule about not being able to swear, how are you feeling about Leicester at the moment?
Ooh, what's the best adjective for this one?
See, this is where your professionalism shines through.
No, and this is where if I was a print journalist, I may be able to find the words a little bit better. I mean, concerned is probably the word, but it's not even concerned about the immediate future. It's for the long-term future as well. Irrespective of whether we stay in the Premier League this season, which I think we probably will do. I think it's been a bit of a wake-up call for the football club that they've stood still for the last couple of years. Again, not necessarily through complete fault of their own. Financially it is difficult, and there has been challenges. But yeah, there's going to be a huge change in the summer in terms of personnel, and a lot of change, and basically a lot of things the club has got to get right in the next 6 months. And that could either end up being the best thing in the world, Sean, and we kind of then got a brand new team, and we're back on the up, or we're, I wouldn't say on a downward spiral, but worst case scenario, we get relegated, and then we've got to change the entire team. It then looks like a long way back from not even the Premier League, but us as Leicester fans, we're sat here hoping and praying and dreaming of being back in Europe, because we love that more than anything. And to think that actually no, we could actually be in the Championship as opposed to looking and mapping our route back into Europe is pretty terrifying. So yeah, it's uncertain to say the least, but I do think that somewhere there is enough quality in the team right now, and I do think that the football club is well run. So I say concerned, but still, in terms of percentages, still confident that we'll be okay.
It seems like Leicester are one of, if not the most roller coaster clubs in the Premier League. You obviously came up and had that great escape in 2014-15. Then you win the Premier League. Next season, Ranieri gets sacked. Then a few years later, twice nearly qualify for the Champions League, win the FA Cup, and now you're saying this stuff. How do you? I mean, what should a minimum aim for Leicester City be in a season?
I don't think they can be one, really. But yeah, I would challenge any football fan to say they've had a more eventful 20 years than Leicester. I mean, if you want to go back a little bit further, 20 years ago we were in administration. We then got promoted in administration, then went back down again. Then we had years in the Championship, went down to League One, came back into the Championship, lost in the playoffs twice, then won the league. Then, as you said, we had the Great Escape. Then we won the Premier League. Then we got the quarterfinals of the Champions League. Then we missed out on the Champions League 2 seasons in a row on the last day of the season. We won the FA Cup. We won the Community Shield. We've been in the Europa League. We played in the Europa Conference League, got to the semi-finals of that one. It has been, remarkable. And, there's part of me which is just long for a mid-table, normal season. And we kind of thought that we'd get that this year, but we're just a little bit off that at the moment. So, yeah, I'd long for that. I mean, where and what should Leicester be expecting? Because of the situation right now, mid-table is what we expected this year, because we weren't able to invest like other clubs. But of course, I think the squad was just a little bit weaker than maybe the club had anticipated at the start of the year. So, yeah, right now it's just surviving. And then next season, it's back to rebuilding, and then, mid-table. But, I mean, the reality is, Sean, if you look outside the big six, it's anyone's, isn't it, between exactly. 7th and 20th. I mean, for the last few years, it's been Leicester and West Ham pushing the top 6. But now Leicester and West Ham are fighting relegation. And those teams now challenging the top 6 are Newcastle, Brentford, Fulham and Who else did we got up there? Did I mention Brighton?
Brighton, yeah, as well.
So the margins in the Premier League are actually incredibly small outside the big six. All it takes is a bit of momentum, having a good summer window, having a really good kind of mood within the team, and that makes such a massive difference. And for Leicester, the recruitment wasn't there. There isn't a great mood in the team. And that has kind of counted so badly against it. But you look at the squads of Fulham and Brighton and Brentford. Are you seriously trying to tell me they're that much better than Leicester's? No, they're not. So it's really difficult to predict these things. As long as you're in the Premier League, that I'd say that seventh is available to anyone if you get things right.
Yeah. Well, I want this to be a happy and a positive experience for you. So I'm going to ask you now. Talk to me about the season Leicester won the Premier League, because how would you even put that into words? I just can't even. I mean, I'm a Liverpool fan, and they had not won the league in my lifetime until a few seasons ago. So to see Leicester beat us to it, I mean, part of me was like, I don't want everyone's going to get it before we do. But on the other hand, I think everyone in the country wanted Leicester to win the league that season.
I mean, it is incredibly surreal, beyond surreal. And fortunately, we get to watch it back quite a lot. It's often put on the TV, isn't it, though? And I have this skill. I think I say skill. I'd imagine most Leicester fans would be able to do it. But if you give me a game that season, I'd be able to tell you the score and the scorers. You kind of remember every single moment of it. But unfortunately, the really sad thing in ways about football is that it moves so incredibly quickly. That was 2016, so 7 years ago. It really isn't that long ago, but in many ways, it feels like a lifetime ago. It really does, and it's almost like you're not really given too much of an opportunity to enjoy it. I remember then the first game of the next season, we played Hull, who'd just been promoted.
Yeah,
and we lost 1-0, and it was suddenly like,
well, the fun's over.
Yeah, exactly, and it really was, and that almost set the tone for the following season. And the next season, we had then the trauma of losing Claudio Ranieri, and we had no choice but to do so, because we would have been relegated otherwise. But you know what I mean? You suddenly went from just being completely in love with everything, and everything you looked at had this beautiful glisten to it, to then suddenly being you've lost Claudio, the man you adored, but you had to accept it had to happen. And at one point we were even fighting relegation, but then in the midst of all that, we had this most incredible journey in the Champions League. And Sean, we were an away goal from getting to the semi-final of the Champions League.
Madrid?
It was. And imagine if little old Leicester had got to the Champions League semi-finals. The whole thing was just so incredibly surreal. But it's just a shame really that we weren't just able to stop there and take a year out and just celebrate, and we had to kind of go back to things. Because then for the next couple of years, it was quite challenging, because the reality is you're never gonna ever get close to replicating anything like the same thing you've just seen. So I mean, we did win the FA Cup, which is also pretty special, but the Premier League was like nothing else you could possibly even describe.
Do you remember where you were the night Chelsea and Tottenham drew?
Yes,
to clinch the title.
Yeah. So I mean, during this period, I was living in Norwich. And I was covering Norwich as a journalist, so I wasn't a season ticket holder, which was quite sad. But I did go, obviously, to as many games as what I did. But towards the back end of the season, Sean, I couldn't bear watching it with other people. I remember I was in the pub, and it was the West Ham game where we drew 2-2, and Vardy got sent off, and then everyone said that the season was then going to go to pot, and we were a one-man team. And we had a penalty in the 90th minute. And I just remember thinking, like, I simply cannot do this around other people. It was just too much emotion. So I ended up watching the back end of the last few games completely on my own. I'd locked myself away. And the night that Chelsea played Spurs, I'd played six-a-side football in the evening. And then it was literally rushing straight home to watch the game. And of course, again, I was watching it completely on my own. And Spurs were leading 2-0 at half time.
Yeah.
And even at this point, Sean, I'm thinking somehow Leicester are going to capitulate and find a way of losing the Premier League, despite the fact actually they'd already accumulated enough points by 33 games to win the title. But somehow I still just didn't believe that we were going to win it. I remember when Hazard scored the goal and then the final whistle went, I did kind of just drop to my knees on the on the carpet in the living room and just kind of have a bit of cry to myself. Just incredible. And it is one of them places and times that you'll never ever forget.
It is. I'm glad we could speak about a more uplifting experience for you. I didn't want you to go away from this saying, John's just really made me upset about that. So, you mentioned it earlier, but we're coming back to it now. When you're not covering sport, you are working as a model. You are the first model I have ever known. So well done. But
thank you.
How did that happen? I'm not saying that in a negative way. I just think, how does one become a model?
Yeah, I suppose I'd imagine it's probably different for lots of people, but I can hand on heart say I never grew up dreaming of one day being a model and having my pictures taken and sending them off to agencies asking to be signed or anything like that. I know obviously that's what lots of people do, but for me it was different. It's when I was doing my first radio job. I and along with another presenter were invited to a community event where some local businesses were having photo shoots to promote their businesses, and there was a fashion brand, clothing brand there, and they had a load of girls all modelling these beautiful dresses. And the photographer said, "Look, we haven't got any guys. We've got this suit here. It'd be great if we had a guy in these pictures. Would you mind?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, fine, no worries, I'll do it." These beautiful girls and having a picture of them. It's like, yeah, fine, I'll do it. So
right, you're a true warrior, Jay.
Yeah, exactly. I thought, well, if I have to. So I stuck the suit on, did the photo shoot, and one of the pictures of me and this other girl ended up being the picture that they'd chosen for the kind of centre page spread of the local newspaper. And the photographer who had taken the picture then messaged me and said, "Look, I work with the local modelling agency here in Norwich, and I think you could do some modelling. Would you be interested?" And again, I thought, well, why not? So she took a few more pictures of me and sent it off to the agency, and they signed me. And then a couple of weeks later, I got a job through, which was for the local shopping mall. And I won't divulge the figures, but it was a lot more than what I'd get ordinarily paid to do my radio shows. Now, look, you have to stress these jobs are very infrequent. It's very much a side hustle. But yeah, I thought, this is quite cool. So yeah, I've been doing it, about 10, 11 years now. There's always something I've been doing on the side. It is quite infrequent. Other times it's very busy, but yeah, it's a good thing to do because, alongside the radio, as I mentioned, I do the television. So there's a massive crossover in terms of obviously being comfortable on camera, when you're having your pictures taken, when you're presenting on TV and also doing the odd commercial. So it kind of, it all weirdly mixes, it's all linked that, being able to be comfortable on camera and having my pictures taken and doing television is actually kind of all worked out for the best. And as I said, it's just a bit of fun on the side. And every now and again, it pays for something nice, which I ordinarily wouldn't have been able to do.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. That's really interesting to hear more about that. And I guess the next one I was going to ask you is, you have all these different things you're doing. You've got the radio, the TV, the modelling, the London Broncos media. Do you have? I'm not putting you on the spot here and saying, right, which one are you doing? But do you have like an area you think you'd like to maybe sort of go into like more fully in future, or are you just sort of enjoying the different aspects and being able to experience all these different roles that you can do?
Yeah, no, I do genuinely enjoy all of them. And the reason I first got into sports journalism and why I went to university to do it was because I had the dream of presenting on Sky Sports News. I was always massively into sport. I realised as a teenager I didn't want to be a PE teacher or a coach. And I remember just watching Sky Sports one day when I was at college, and I thought, I don't know what, I could do that. And that's kind of where it all was born from. So, I mean, somewhere within me, I still want to do that because I've not, achieved that kind of goal and ambition. But then also I remember that when I was doing my first job in local radio, this kind of young, naive person thinking that, I'll just do this for 2 years and then maybe I'll go work at ITV for a couple of years, then off to Sky Sports, thinking that these things just happen. But they just don't. It's not how it works. And, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but, it's a difficult industry to crack, and, you'll have the best made plans, but ultimately you never know really what's going to happen. So all I would just say is work as hard as you can. It is quite an industry where you do need to know people, so you will meet people along the way, get as many contacts as possible, and I'd say that Sean, of the 5, 6, 7 jobs that either I've had or previously had, I've never got through an interview. It's all been through knowing people and going in and doing some freelancing and then convincing them to let you come back again. And that's how it's always worked for me. So it's just always been about, an opportunity happens, like the London Broncos one happened the start of last season. So I've been doing this 18 months now. And somebody asked me if I wanted to be the stadium announcer. And I just thought,
oh, wow.
Yeah. And I'll be honest, I'd never done it before. But I'm not going to tell them that. I'm thinking, how hard can it be? I work on the radio. I'm a broadcaster. And I thought, sod it, I'm just going to say yes. And I went for it. And honestly, it's been one of the best things I've ever done. I absolutely love the job more than anything. So I just say yes to everything and work for different opportunities. And the great thing about my job at talkSPORT is that is my Monday to Friday. That is my salary. And that's what kind of pays for me to live. But I'm finished, Sean, at 9:30 in the morning. So I've got the rest of my day to do all these other things, if you want to. And if you don't want to, you can just have the day to yourself. But, I really like that flexibility of being on the radio on talkSPORT in the mornings, and then going off and doing all the other things that I want to do. So that suits me right now in terms of my lifestyle. If an opportunity ever came up to kind of go back into more television, I would jump at that opportunity if it suited me. I very much enjoy auto cue in terms of that style of presenting. So yeah, that would definitely interest me, but there's not many of those jobs around. So for the time being, I'm just going to carry on doing what I'm doing. When opportunities come around, if it interests me and it suits me, then I'll say yes. And the nature of the freelance world is that jobs come and go, particularly in London, but it's a great place to be because there are still plenty of other jobs out there. So yeah, I enjoy what I'm doing. If TV work became more available at some point, then yeah, that would be nice.
Well, if anyone's listening, I can vouch for him because he's a top guy.
Thanks, Sean.
I love the way you just dropped in there. Yeah, I do a bit of stadium announcing as well, just like as if on top of everything else.
Yeah.
This might be quite a tricky question to ask for you, but if you can you pick a most memorable moment of your entire working career so far? If you can.
Can I?
See, you've made a rod for your own back here. You've got all these jobs and everything, but then how do you pick out just one moment? Or it doesn't have to be maybe the most memorable, but like something you particularly enjoyed, or like an aspect of what you do that you really enjoy.
Yeah, I'm going to pick a couple actually, if that's okay. And they all predate living in London and working at talkSPORT. So. As I mentioned, I started out in local radio, and the great thing about local radio is it depends where you are, but where I worked, it was in King's Lynn, so in West Norfolk, and it was the biggest radio station in West Norfolk in terms of it would get far more listeners than the Hearts and that kind of radio station at the time, and it was quite surreal because whilst I was incredibly junior in my career. You're like local celebrities in these places, and that was kind of very surreal for me. But I loved it. It was a great job. It was such a fun job and such a fun radio station. So we got to do things like hosting the Christmas lights switch ons.
Oh, wow.
And as I was the co-host of the breakfast show, and I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's thousands of people would turn up for it, and being on stage doing that kind of thing. Was always just absolutely amazing. I loved that hugely, and I was very sad when that job ended. But as much as I enjoyed it, it didn't pay a lot of money. So there was a shelf life to it. But yeah, I loved that, and that'll always stick in my mind. Going up on stage, not really knowing what on earth I was doing because I'd never done anything like it before. But that was amazing. And the other one was when I was working at Mustard TV, so it's just the local TV channels, and I produced all their sport content there and presented bits and pieces. But we secured the rights to air a couple of Norwich City pre-season friendlies, and it was the first time a local TV channel had ever aired live football. like it before. So it was a massive deal. And, when I got to produce that, and I was very much kind of left to my own devices again, kind of winging it a little bit, because there was just a presumption of, you're the producer, you sort it out. I was having to build a studio and everything. Wow. Exactly. And then when it all came, and when it all came together, I have to say that it was a pretty cool experience. It was thinking, I did that, and literally if I hadn't done that whole thing would have just fallen through, and the station would have looked, horrific. I probably wouldn't have ever worked again. And, there was a huge amount of pressure on me, and I was aware of it at the time. I don't think anybody else realised just how much I was having to do. But when I pulled that off, that was pretty cool.
That was your sliding doors moment.
Yeah.
What if? Yeah. Well, I'm very glad you came through it, because
I say sliding doors. There was a carrying chairs moment. And when I say I built this studio, no, I genuinely had to build the entire studio.
Oh my god!
And I had no money to do it. So I swear to God, Sean, I walked up at the top of Carrow Road was where the TV studios are, and there's just little metal steps to get up to this TV studio. It's not like a lift or anything like that, and it's the same for most TV studios. If anyone has ever gone up to them, like the gantries at football stadiums, it's not particularly ideal to lugging stuff up there. I was getting massive heavy chairs, like suitable to put in a TV studio, from my office in Norwich, putting them in the back of my car, driving down to Carrow Road and carrying them the entire way up to the stadium.
Oh my god!
And it was honestly, it was so hard, and I was so exhausted. I say it was blood, sweat, and tears building that whole thing. And as I said, when it worked, it was quite cool, and quite ironically as well. I ended up getting my job at talkSPORT because, in some roundabout way of what I did there, because I had to book all the production staff, and I had to put the commentator, and there's loads of things happen between these two incidents, but ultimately it was the presenter which I hired to do the commentary ended up getting me my job at talkSPORT.
Oh,
so
wow.
Exactly. So it all kind of came full circle.
Well, I'm glad, because I feel like that's the very least you deserve after everything you had to do on that day. No, that's a proper roll your sleeves up and do it.
Yeah, you just got to do it.
Exactly. Nice one. So this is the last question now, and it's kind of a 2-in-1 question. So Matchday, which is the host of this, I don't know who I am working for, Matchday.
Yes.
It's a big part of it is about collecting footballer cards to build a squad. So what I want to put to you is 2 parts to this question. Part 1, which 3 Leicester City players should every Matchday user have in their squad? And on the flip side, if Leicester City was a Matchday squad and you could add any 3 players, who would you pick?
So they have to be current Leicester players?
No, they can be...
Thank God for that. That's a lot of rubbish.
You should have known.
Yeah.
Any all-time Leicester players will be fine.
I mean, it's relatively easy in terms of the 3 Leicester ones, because we had the 3 best players in the Premier League when we won the Premier League, and I couldn't possibly, Sean, leave out any of them. I mean, you could probably do have a defender in there, but I'm gonna say N'Golo Kante could probably do you a job there. So peak N'Golo Kante, Riyad Mahrez, the most skillful, talented footballer I've ever seen play football, just remarkable and an absolute joy to watch. And then the greatest player in the football club's history, Jamie Vardy. So that's an easy 3, to be honest. And I think they do okay.
All 3 of those are available on Matchday, everyone, by the way. So that worked out well. I thought you were going to say, Gordon Banks. And I was like, we don't have his card, unfortunately. So
we don't need a keeper. Like N'Golo Kante can literally play all of those. Exactly. Yeah, he's doing all of them.
Just have him on his own.
Yeah.
And what about the 3 players that you would pick if you had the choice?
Again, can this be from whenever?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Why not? We're all friends here. Yeah.
Right. I mean, for me, the greatest of all time is Maradona. Again, just it's the maverick about him, and then just the sheer joy that he gives when you'd watch him play football. So Maradona as kind of the attacking flair. In midfield, well, just to have more of a midfielder, again, kind of down a similar route of just pure elegance is Zinedine Zidane. Again, I think actually quite underrated, bizarrely, in many ways. I think people have forgotten how good he was mainly because he headbutted somebody. And that tends to be what
person.
yeah, exactly. And you ruin an entire legacy. And again, I'm aware this isn't particularly defence minded. I hope they don't have to play a game of football.
No, it's all fun.
But the other one is Ronaldinho. Again, I just absolutely loved watching him play football. And again, I find myself often watching show reels and highlights of him. And there was a period, probably 2 or 3 years when he was at Barcelona, where he was the best player on the planet. Absolutely. But not because he was scoring 60 or 70 goals, but just because he was just better at everybody else. And again, unfortunately, he didn't quite have the same longevity as some of the other greatest of all times. But if he had been at that level for 2 or 3 years longer, I think people would talk about him as one of the greatest players of all time. But because he was only the best in the world for a couple of years, he kind of gets forgotten. And, you know, he was just pure joy to watch. So Ronaldinho, Maradona and Zidane would be my three.
Very good choice. I'm just thinking about Maradona and Vardy together in attack. There'd be some fireworks there. I think that would be
that'd be interesting.
Out as well.
Yeah. It'd be great fun or a complete disaster. I think we'd have to just go for it to find out, wouldn't we?
Oh, nice one. Well, I think that's everything I had to ask you, Jake. So I just want to say a massive thank you for speaking to us today. I think it's been really, really interesting to hear about all the different things you're doing. I don't think I couldn't name another radio host / model. So it's very interesting to hear that. And just really, really cool to speak to you. Thank you for speaking to us, and all the best with all your future endeavours. Because there are a lot of them, obviously.
Yes, and hopefully many more to come. Look, Sean, it's been an absolute pleasure. I've really enjoyed it. If there's anything ever you possibly would want to ask me again, then feel free to give me a shout and I'll happily do it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Jake. And thank you to everyone who listened. We'll be uploading the audio if anyone couldn't hear the whole thing, weren't able to stay for it, but we'll get that up as soon as possible. So, just like to say thank you to you again, Jake. And go ahead.
No, I was going to say thank you.
Okay. So, yes, thank you. And goodbye to everyone. Thank you for listening. Cheers.